Wait, he looked at his grandson in a graduation gown and said there was no room. But later I found out his name was removed days earlier. Who decided that? And why hide it?
My father looked at my son, diploma in hand, graduation gown still on, and said there was no room for him tonight. Not we don't have enough chairs. Not the reservation's tight. He looked Daniel dead in the eyes and said, no room for him. My name is Maya. I'm 44 years old, and I have spent the last 2 decades doing everything right. I raised my son alone after a divorce that left me with nothing. I worked nights, weekends, double shifts. I missed sleep so Daniel wouldn't miss opportunities. And the night he walked across that stage, the night I had dreamed about since he was 7 years old doing homework at my kitchen table, my own father turned him away at the door like a stranger. Daniel didn't argue. He just stood there holding his certificate looking at me. And that look, that quiet, exhausted, I've seen this before look, told me this wasn't new to him. That's what broke something open in me. Because I suddenly realized my son had been absorbing this his entire life. Quietly, alone. And I had let it happen. What I did next changed everything, but first, you need to understand what was really behind that door. My father Gerald didn't become cruel overnight. He built it slowly, quietly, the way men like him do. Gerald is 72 years old, retired attorney, the kind of man who commands every room he enters and calls it leadership. He owns the house Maya and Daniel have lived in since her divorce. Rent-free, yes, but never free. There was always a condition attached. A reminder. A moment where he made sure Maya knew exactly who held the power. But here's what I never fully let myself see. Gerald treated Daniel differently from every other grandchild. My sister Diane's kids got hugs at the door, seats at the head of the table, birthday envelopes with cash inside. Daniel got handshakes. Formal ones. Like he was a business acquaintance's child Gerald was obligated to tolerate. Daniel never complained. Not once. He'd just quietly move to the edge of the room and find something to do with himself. I told myself it was Gerald's personality. His generation. His way. I was lying to myself. Before we continue with this video, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The graduation dinner had actually been booked for 8 people. Daniel's name was removed from the reservation 3 days earlier. I only found that out later. But that wasn't even the worst part. That night, after Gerald shut the door, I drove Daniel home in silence. I made him tea. I told him I was proud of him because I was completely without condition. He smiled, said goodnight, and went to his room. And I sat at my kitchen table and didn't move for a long time. Then I got up and went to the filing cabinet. There's a box I hadn't opened in 15 years. Old documents. Paperwork from my mother's passing. I'd let Gerald handle most of it at the time because I was grieving and he was an attorney, and I trusted him. That trust was the most expensive mistake of my life. Inside that box was my mother's amended will. I'd seen it once before and signed where Gerald told me to sign. I hadn't read it carefully. Tonight, I read every word. My mother had originally named Daniel as a beneficiary, her only grandchild at the time the first will was drafted. The amended version, signed 3 years before she died, had removed him entirely. His share redirected to a family trust. A trust Gerald controlled.
Wait, he rewrote the will to cut the only grandson out, then moved everything into a trust he controlled. How is that not deliberate?
I picked up the phone and called my mother's former estate attorney. His pause before he even spoke told me everything I needed to know. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I had a name, a probate attorney recommended by my mother's former estate lawyer. Someone completely outside Gerald's circle. I called her at 8 a.m. and spoke for 40 minutes. What she told me was this. The will amendment was signed during a period when my mother was in documented cognitive decline. Medical records confirmed it. And Gerald, the man who drafted the amendment, the man who benefited from it, had held power of attorney over my mother during that exact window. That is a textbook conflict of interest. She also told me something that stopped my breathing. There had been a legal challenge filed against the amendment shortly after my mother's death. Someone had questioned it. That challenge was quietly dropped, withdrawn by whoever had filed it. I dug further. The challenge had been filed by my mother's longtime personal accountant, acting on her earlier verbal instructions. It was dropped after a single phone call from Gerald's law firm. I forwarded everything to my attorney and authorized her to proceed. That evening, Gerald called me to apologize about the door. Casually, like it was nothing. I told him I appreciated it. I even laughed a little. What I didn't tell him was that 2 hours earlier, I had already filed. Gerald's phone started ringing the next morning. And it wasn't me calling. The probate filing triggered a formal estate review. My attorney presented the medical records documenting my mother's cognitive decline, the timeline of the amendment, and Gerald's dual role as both power of attorney and direct beneficiary of the changes he oversaw. The conflict of interest was undeniable. After 4 months of legal proceedings, the amendment was invalidated. My mother's original will was reinstated. Daniel was a named beneficiary. He had always been one. When I sat across from my son and told him everything, the will, the years of deliberate erasure, what Gerald had done, and what I had done about it, Daniel didn't explode. He didn't break down. He just looked at me for a long moment and said quietly, "You went back for me." I said, "I should have gone back sooner." Gerald faced formal scrutiny over his management of the estate. His reputation, that carefully constructed image of the honorable family patriarch, collapsed within his own circle. Diane stopped returning his calls after learning what he had concealed. The family he had controlled for decades finally saw him clearly. Months later, Daniel received his first disbursement. He took me to dinner. Same restaurant. Same night of the week. This time, we had a reservation and both our names were on it.
If someone can quietly rewrite a story around you and call it normal for years, then how many people are living inside decisions they never knew were made for them?